I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're cleaning a kitchen, folding laundry, or coming home from work, staring at the clock after a long day. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise, today's story will surprise you. The silence in the Lewis mansion on Fifth Avenue was the kind that echoes in your chest, heavy as a winter fog rolling off the Hudson River. It wasn't just quiet. It was the silence of a home that had forgotten how to breathe. 9-year-old Harper Lewis sat by the towering windows of his father's penthouse, watching yellow cabs crawl like ants 40 floors below, his small fingers pressed against glass so cold it might have been carved from his own loneliness. The boy hadn't spoken a word in 2 years, not since the morning his mother, Sarah, had whispered goodbye from a hospital bed that smelled of disinfectant and dying roses. The cancer had taken her slowly, devouring her laughter first, then her stories, and finally her voice, the same voice that once filled this marble monument with songs and warmth. Now the mansion stood like a beautiful corpse, all crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs, but empty of everything that made a house a home. Jonathan Lewis, Harper's father, had built an empire worth $300 million through ruthless stock market investments and cryptocurrency portfolios that multiplied like rabbits in spring. His assets stretched across Manhattan real estate, his Bitcoin holdings alone worth more than most people see in a lifetime. But all that wealth couldn't buy back his wife's smile or unlock his son's voice. The boy had become a mystery that money couldn't solve. Expensive therapists came and went like seasons. Dr. Richardson with his thick glasses and dry theories, Miss Patterson with her colorful flashcards and forced enthusiasm, Mr. Chen with his meditation techniques that fell flat against Harper's impenetrable wall. They tried everything: behavioral modification, play therapy, art classes, even a specialist from Switzerland who charged $5,000 a session. Each professional left with the same conclusion: Harper Lewis was unreachable. The trauma had sealed him inside himself like a letter never meant to be opened. Jonathan watched from his glass-walled office, surrounded by stock certificates and dividend statements, as another tutor packed her briefings and shook her head in defeat. His son sat in the music room, staring at the Steinway piano that had once filled their evenings with Sarah's melodies. Now it stood silent, its ebony surface reflecting nothing but emptiness. The millionaire buried himself deeper in work, tracking his investments obsessively, watching numbers dance on computer screens while his child disappeared deeper into silence. The house staff moved through the rooms like ghosts. Mrs. Henderson, the stern housekeeper who had worked for the family for 15 years, tiptoeing around Harper as if he might shatter at any moment. James, the butler, polished silver with mechanical precision, his face a mask of professional indifference. The cook prepared elaborate meals that Harper barely touched, leaving plates of untouched delicacies that would feed a family of 4. Everyone had given up hope, everyone except Maria. Maria Gonzalez stepped off the subway at 86th Street and Lexington Avenue every morning at 6:30, her worn leather purse clutched against her chest like armor. She had traveled from her tiny studio apartment in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, where the walls were thin and the sirens never slept, where her neighbors knew each other's heartaches and children played in streets that had seen too much. At 32, Maria carried herself with a dignity that poverty had tried but failed to break. Her hands bore the story of her life, calloused from years of cleaning other people's homes, scarred from a childhood spent helping her grandmother wash clothes in a Queens laundromat that smelled of detergent and dreams deferred. Her dark eyes held depths that spoke of loss and resilience in equal measure. She had lost her younger brother Miguel to the streets 3 years ago, a boy who had chosen the quick money of corner dealing over the long road of honest work. His funeral had been the last time Maria had cried in public. Now she saved her tears for the privacy of her bathroom, where the shower could wash away both sorrow and the evidence of her pain. Jonathan Lewis had hired Maria almost by accident. His previous housekeeper had quit suddenly, overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere of grief that hung over the mansion like smog. The employment agency had sent 3 candidates: a middle-aged Irish woman with sterling references who took one look at Harper's vacant stare and made excuses about another opportunity. A stern German lady who spoke of discipline and structure in clipped tones that made everyone uncomfortable. And finally, Maria. She had arrived wearing her best dress, a navy blue garment she had bought secondhand and altered herself, her thick black hair pulled back in a neat bun, her resume printed on paper she couldn't really afford. Jonathan had barely looked at her credentials, more interested in the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. His net worth had jumped another $12 million that month, his diversified portfolio performing beautifully, while his personal life crumbled like yesterday's newspaper. Maria's references were adequate. She had worked for 3 families in Brooklyn Heights, cleaning brownstones where successful artists and lawyers lived with their children and golden retrievers. She was reliable, quiet, and most importantly, available immediately. The salary he offered was generous by her standards, $1,800 a week, more money than she had ever earned in her life. For Jonathan, it was pocket change, less than he spent on wine for a single dinner party. "The position requires discretion," he had told her, his voice as cold as the marble floors beneath their feet. "My son has special needs. He doesn't respond well to interaction. You're to maintain the house, prepare simple meals, and otherwise remain invisible. Is that understood?" Maria had nodded, though something in his tone made her chest tighten. She had worked for difficult families before, rich people who spoke to her like she was furniture, who left messes deliberately to test her patience, who discussed their secrets in front of her as if she wasn't fully human. But there was something different about the pain in Jonathan Lewis's voice, a wound so deep it colored everything around him gray. The first week felt like walking through a museum after closing time. The mansion sprawled across the entire top floor of the building, with rooms that seemed to serve no purpose except to display wealth. Oriental carpets from Persia covered floors of Italian marble. Original Picasso sketches hung on walls that no one looked at. A dining room table that could seat 20 gathered dust, while Harper ate solitary bowls of cereal in the kitchen. Maria moved through these spaces like a careful ghost, dusting surfaces that barely needed cleaning, polishing mirrors that reflected only emptiness. Harper appeared and disappeared like a mirage. She would catch glimpses of him, sitting in the library with an unopened book in his lap, standing at windows that overlooked Central Park, like a prisoner contemplating escape, lying on his bedroom floor, tracing patterns in the Persian rug with one small finger. He never acknowledged her presence. When she entered a room, he would leave without sound, his bare feet making no noise on the expensive floors. The other staff treated Maria with the particular coldness reserved for outsiders who might threaten their comfortable positions. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, watched Maria's every move with eyes like a hawk circling prey. She found fault with everything: the way Maria folded the towels, the brands of cleaning products she preferred, even the speed at which she worked through her daily tasks. "In this house," Mrs. Henderson declared during Maria's second day, her British accent sharp as broken crystal, "we maintain certain standards. I trust you understand that your background doesn't lower our expectations." The comment hit like a slap, but Maria absorbed it without reaction. She had learned long ago that dignity wasn't something others could take from you. It was something you either possessed or you didn't. James, the butler, was more subtle in his disdain. He would rearrange items she had just organized, then express surprise at finding them out of place. He spoke about her in the third person even when she was present, telling Mrs. Henderson, "Perhaps she doesn't understand our methods here." The cook, an elderly Frenchwoman named Delphine, openly resented having to explain the family's dietary preferences to someone she considered beneath her station. But the cruelest treatment came from Harper's current tutor, Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a woman with silver hair and credentials from Harvard who charged $300 an hour. Dr. Whitfield had been working with Harper for 6 months with little progress, and Maria's presence seemed to represent some kind of threat to her professional authority. She made a point of speaking loudly about unqualified personnel, and the importance of maintaining therapeutic boundaries whenever Maria was within earshot. The criticism rolled off Maria like rain from a well-oiled coat. She had grown up in a world where survival meant developing thick skin and an unshakable sense of self-worth. Her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents returned to El Salvador, had taught her a simple lesson. Mija, let them measure your worth by their ignorance. Your value isn't determined by their ability to see it. On her 10th day in the mansion, something shifted like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the earth. Maria was cleaning the music room, a space that felt particularly haunted, when she noticed Harper sitting at the piano bench. His feet didn't reach the floor, and his hands hovered over the keys without pressing them, as if he were reading music written in a language he had forgotten how to speak. The Steinway was magnificent, a concert grand worth more than most people's homes, its surface polished to mirror perfection. But it had remained silent for 2 years, gathering dust like everything else in this mausoleum of memories. Maria continued her work quietly, using a soft cloth to clean the picture frames that lined the mantelpiece. One photograph caught her attention, a family portrait that must have been taken shortly before Sarah Lewis's diagnosis. Jonathan stood behind his wife and son, his hand resting protectively on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah glowed with life, her auburn hair catching sunlight, her eyes bright with laughter. And Harper. Harper was grinning, gap-toothed and completely unguarded, pressed against his mother's side like a flower turning toward the sun. The contrast with the silent ghost of a boy sitting 10 feet away was heartbreaking. Without thinking, Maria began to hum. It was an old song her grandmother used to sing while braiding her hair on Sunday mornings in their Queens apartment, a Mexican lullaby about a little bird who had lost his song but found it again when he remembered he was loved. The melody drifted through the room like incense, soft and wordless and full of memory. Maria didn't realize she was humming until she noticed that Harper had gone completely still. His hands had stopped hovering over the keys. His head had turned slightly in her direction, though he still didn't look at her directly. She continued singing softly while she worked, the Spanish words flowing like honey. Duérmete mi niño, que la noche ya llegó. Sueña con los ángeles, que tu mami te cantó. The silence that followed felt different, not empty but full, like the pause between thunder and rain. Harper's fingers touched the piano keys so lightly they made no sound, but Maria could see him moving, tiny gestures like he was playing along with a melody only he could hear. When she finished the song, the room settled back into its usual quiet, but something had changed. The air itself seemed softer. Harper remained at the piano for another 20 minutes after Maria left, his small fingers eventually pressing the keys to produce actual notes, tentative and off-key, but real. It was the first sound he had made intentionally in 2 years. Mrs. Henderson, passing by the door, stopped dead in her tracks. The notes were simple, childish, but they rang through the mansion like church bells announcing resurrection. That evening, after the staff had gone home and Jonathan had retreated to his office to review his investment portfolio, Harper found Maria cleaning the kitchen. She was humming again, the same soft melody, while she wiped down surfaces that gleamed under the pendant lights. He stood in the doorway for several minutes, just watching, his bare feet silent on the cold floor. Finally, he moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Maria pretended not to notice him approaching, but her heart began to race. She continued her gentle song while scrubbing a pot that was already clean, giving him space to come closer or retreat as he chose. Harper stopped 3 feet away from her, close enough that she could hear his breathing, soft and quick like a bird's. When she glanced down, she saw that he was mouthing the words to her song, his lips moving soundlessly as if he were singing along in a frequency only he could hear. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening when autumn rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows like fingers tapping impatiently for attention. Maria had worked late, staying behind to prepare meals for the week, a task that usually fell to Delphine, but the French cook had called in sick with what she dramatically described as une migraine terrible. The mansion felt different at night, less oppressive somehow, as if the darkness softened its hard edges and made it possible to breathe. Maria was in the kitchen, her hands deep in bread dough that would become tomorrow's rolls when she heard it. A soft thud from somewhere in the house, followed by silence so complete it made her skin prickle. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved through the hallway, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble. The house absorbed sound like a sponge, swallowing footsteps and whispers until sometimes Maria wondered if she had imagined her own voice. She found Harper in the music room, sitting on the floor beside the piano bench, clutching something against his chest. As she drew closer, Maria could see it was a photograph. The glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern, the frame bent at an angle that spoke of impact against something hard. It was a picture she hadn't seen before, smaller and more intimate than the family portraits on display. In it, Sarah Lewis sat at this very piano, Harper on her lap, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's reach. Harper's shoulders shook with silent sobs, his face pressed against the damaged photograph as if he could somehow climb inside the memory and stay there forever. Maria approached slowly. The way you might approach a wounded animal, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. Sometimes, Mita, the bravest thing you can do is simply sit with someone's pain. She lowered herself to the floor beside Harper, her back against the piano's ebony curve, close enough to offer comfort but far enough away to let him choose whether to accept it. For several minutes, they sat in silence, broken only by Harper's ragged breathing and the rain's percussion against glass. When Maria finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My little brother Miguel used to cry like that," she said, her words floating between them like smoke. "After our parents went back home to El Salvador when I was 16 and he was 12, they told us they'd send for us soon, but soon turned into never, and we were left with our grandmother in Queens." Harper's crying gradually quieted, though he didn't look at her. Maria continued, her voice carrying the weight of old grief. "Miguel was so angry at being left behind. He would hide in the closet with our mother's last letter and cry until he made himself sick. I used to sit outside the closet door and sing to him, the same songs Abuela taught me, until he fell asleep on the floor, surrounded by her clothes that still smelled like her perfume." She paused, remembering the cramped apartment where cockroaches scuttled across peeling linoleum and the neighbors' arguments bled through paper-thin walls. "One night, I opened the closet door and found him holding Mama's rosary so tight it had left marks on his palms. He looked at me with eyes just like yours, full of missing someone so much it feels like drowning." Harper's grip on the photograph loosened slightly. Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn religious medal, San Miguel Arcangel, the patron saint of protection that had belonged to her brother. The silver was tarnished and the image nearly worn away from years of worried fingers, but it still caught the lamplight like a tiny star. "Miguel carried this everywhere," she said, placing it gently on the floor between them. "He used to tell me that as long as he had it, he could feel Mama watching over him. After he died, I kept it to remember that love doesn't disappear, even when people do. It just changes form." This was the most personal thing Maria had ever shared with anyone in the Lewis household. A piece of her heart offered to a broken boy who understood loss in ways no child should. Harper's eyes, red with crying, focused on the small medal. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched it with one finger, as if testing whether it might burn him. When it didn't, he picked it up and held it against the light, turning it over to see both sides. "She's not really gone," Maria whispered, nodding toward the photograph in Harper's lap. "She's in every song you remember, every story she told you, every time you touch those piano keys she taught you to love. That's how love works. It finds ways to stay." For the first time in 2 years, Harper looked directly at another human being. His eyes met Maria's, and in them she saw not just grief but a flicker of something else, hope, fragile as a soap bubble but absolutely real. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he reached over and gently touched Maria's hand, his small fingers cold but steady against her work-rough skin. They sat together until the rain stopped and the city lights began to blur at the edges of exhaustion. Two people who understood that sometimes healing begins not with words but with the simple act of not being alone. Spring arrived early that year, creeping through Central Park like a secret and climbing the walls of Manhattan until even the 40th floor felt touched by rebirth. The change in Harper was subtle at first, a hummed melody here, a whispered word there, like a radio slowly being tuned to a clearer frequency. Maria noticed everything. She saw how he began lingering in rooms where she worked, no longer fleeing at her approach but drawing closer. Curious about this woman who sang while she cleaned and spoke to him as if his silence didn't make him invisible. She watched him discover the medal she had given him, wearing it on a chain tucked beneath his shirt where it couldn't be seen but could always be felt. Most remarkably, she witnessed his gradual return to the piano. It began with single notes pressed hesitantly, as if he were testing whether the instrument remembered him. Then, simple melodies, childhood songs his mother had taught him, played slowly and with long pauses between phrases. Maria learned to time her cleaning around these musical moments, working in nearby rooms so Harper could hear her presence without feeling watched. The household began to notice the changes, though they interpreted them differently. Mrs. Part Henderson attributed Harper's increased appetite to the changing season. James remarked that the boy seemed less likely to hide when guests visited. Dr. Whitfield, the Harvard-educated therapist, took credit for what she called a breakthrough in his receptive processing, though she couldn't explain why it had taken 6 months to achieve results that seemed to manifest overnight. But Jonathan Lewis, watching from his office doorway as his son played a halting version of Happy Birthday on Sarah's piano, knew something fundamental had shifted in his household. The song Harper played was one Sarah used to sing to him every morning, not just on his birthday, but any day she thought needed celebrating. Hearing it now, played by small hands that had been silent for so long, Jonathan felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door he had forgotten how to unlock. He found himself spending more time at home, working from his study instead of the downtown office, drawn by the sound of his son's tentative music, and something else, a warmth that had returned to the mansion like blood returning to a limb that had fallen asleep. The source of that warmth, he gradually realized, was Maria. She moved through the house differently than the other staff, with a presence that invited life rather than simply maintaining it. She sang while she worked, hummed while she cooked, and spoke to Harper in a voice that assumed he would answer someday, not because he should, but because he could. Jonathan began to observe her more carefully during the brief interactions they shared. When she served his morning coffee, she asked about his day as if his answer mattered. When she prepared lunch, she included small touches that no one had requested. A flower from the garden in a water glass, homemade bread that filled the kitchen with yeast and possibility, soup that tasted like someone had stirred love into the broth. These gestures weren't part of her job description, but they transformed meals from mere fuel into moments of connection. One afternoon, Jonathan found Harper and Maria in the kitchen making cookies together. Harper stood on a step stool, carefully measuring flour while Maria guided his hands. They worked in comfortable silence, punctuated by Maria's gentle instructions and Harper's occasional nods. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that Jonathan felt like an intruder witnessing something precious. "Mijo," Maria said, using the Spanish endearment as naturally as breathing. "Add just a little more vanilla. Your mama, she would want these to taste like happiness." Harper nodded solemnly and added an extra capful of vanilla, his concentration absolute. When they slid the cookie sheet into the oven, Harper actually smiled, a quick flash of joy that transformed his entire face. Jonathan retreated to his office, but the image stayed with him through the afternoon's conference calls and stock reports. His son was coming back to life, and Maria was the catalyst. The mansion had begun to breathe again by the time autumn painted Central Park in shades of gold and copper, but not everyone welcomed the change. Dr. Margaret Whitfield felt her professional authority threatened by Harper's obvious attachment to the household staff, specifically to a woman with no formal training in child psychology or trauma therapy. During their sessions, Harper now spoke in whispered monosyllables and occasionally hummed the same Mexican lullaby Maria sang while she worked. Dr. Whitfield found this development professionally offensive and personally infuriating. "Mr. Lewis," she announced during one of their monthly progress meetings, her voice crisp with academic authority, "I must express concern about the inappropriate attachment forming between Harper and your domestic staff. The boy is transferring his maternal needs onto a figure who lacks the professional boundaries necessary for healthy development." Jonathan looked up from his computer screen, where cryptocurrency prices flickered like digital heartbeats. His Bitcoin investments alone had gained another $40 million in value that quarter, but the numbers seemed less important lately, overshadowed by the sound of his son's returning voice. "Dr. Whitfield, Harper is making remarkable progress. He's speaking, playing music, even laughing occasionally. Isn't that what we hoped for?" The therapist adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses with obvious irritation. "The progress is superficial, built on an unstable foundation. This woman," she spoke the word as if it tasted unpleasant, "is encouraging dependency rather than genuine healing. She's a domestic worker, not a trained professional. Her methods could cause long-term psychological damage." Meanwhile, in the staff quarters, similar conversations were taking place with different motivations. Mrs. Henderson had watched Maria's growing importance in the household with increasing resentment. For 15 years, she had been the unquestionable authority below stairs, managing the mansion with military precision. Now, this quiet woman from Brooklyn was receiving praise and attention that had never been directed toward the existing staff. "Mark my words," Mrs. Henderson told James over their evening tea. "This cannot last. She's overstepping her position, becoming too familiar with the family. Mr. Lewis will come to his senses eventually." James nodded agreement, while privately noting how much more alive the house felt since Maria's arrival. The boy actually acknowledged their presence now, and even Mr. Lewis seemed less like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. But loyalty to Mrs. Henderson and 15 years of established hierarchy kept him silent about these observations. Delphine, the cook, felt similarly threatened by Maria's interventions in kitchen territory. The fact that Harper actually ate the simple meals Maria prepared, while leaving Delphine's elaborate creations largely untouched, was a professional insult she couldn't forgive. "She has no training in proper nutrition," Delphine complained to anyone who would listen. "These peasant foods she feeds the boy, this is not appropriate for a household of such distinction." The conspiracy began to form organically, without formal planning, but with the inevitability of water finding its level. It started with small sabotages, cleaning supplies mysteriously running low, schedules changed without Maria's knowledge, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Dr. Whitfield, observing the household dynamics with professional interest, saw an opportunity to advance her own agenda. If she could prove that Maria's influence was harmful to Harper's development, she could eliminate the competition and secure her own indispensable position in the boy's recovery. The seeds of Maria's downfall were planted in soil watered by professional jealousy, personal resentment, and the particular cruelty that emerges when threatened hierarchies fight for survival. The accusation came on a Tuesday morning in November when fog rolled off the East River like smoke and muffled the city's usual symphony of horns and sirens. Maria arrived to find the mansion in chaos, Mrs. Henderson in the main hallway, her face flushed with indignation, James pacing the marble floors with uncharacteristic agitation, and Dr. Whitfield standing rigid with professional authority beside Jonathan Lewis, who looked older than his 45 years. Harper was nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Lewis," Mrs. Henderson announced in a voice that carried 15 years of assumed moral authority, "I'm afraid we have a most serious situation. The Tiffany necklace that belonged to your late wife, The one with the emerald pendant worth $50,000 has gone missing from the master bedroom safe. Maria felt the blood drain from her face as every eye in the room turned toward her. She had cleaned the master suite countless times, had seen the safe standing open while she dusted the nearby furniture, but she had never so much as looked closely at its contents, let alone touched anything inside. "The safe was found open yesterday evening," Dr. Whitfield added, her voice clinically precise, "and only certain members of the household staff have access to the master bedroom." The implication hung in the air like poisonous gas. Of the current staff, only Mrs. Henderson and Maria regularly cleaned the family's private quarters. Mrs. Henderson had been with the family for 15 years. Maria had been there for 8 months. The mathematics of suspicion were simple and devastating. Furthermore, Dr. Whitfield continued, consulting a leather portfolio as if reading from a psychological evaluation, "I have observed concerning behavior patterns that suggest possible kleptomania or financial desperation. The subject has demonstrated excessive attachment behaviors and boundary violations that are consistent with manipulative personality disorders." Jonathan listened with the same expression he wore during corporate takeovers, cold, analytical, removing emotion from decision-making. His diversified investment portfolio was worth over $400 million now, his real estate holdings alone generating enough monthly income to buy whatever he desired. But the necklace wasn't about money. It was the last gift he had given to Sarah before her diagnosis, a symbol of love that had seemed eternal until disease proved otherwise. "Maria," Jonathan said finally, his voice carrying the weight of judgment already past, "do you have anything to say about this accusation?" The moment stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Maria could feel the trap closing around her, engineered by people who saw her growing influence in the household as a threat to their own positions. She could deny the accusation, plead her innocence, remind them of the trust Harper had placed in her, the progress he had made under her gentle care. But she had grown up poor in a world that rarely believed the protests of the powerless, and she recognized the futility of fighting battles already lost. "I have nothing to say," Maria replied quietly, her dignity intact even as her heart broke into pieces sharp enough to cut. "Nothing to say?" Mrs. Henderson repeated incredulously. "When accused of theft, you have nothing to say in your defense?" Maria met each accusing stare with steady eyes. Her grandmother had taught her that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice was simple grace, not because it would change minds already made up, but because it preserved the essential self that no accusation could touch. "I have nothing to say," she repeated. Jonathan's verdict was swift and final. "Clear out your things immediately. Your employment is terminated, effective now. Consider yourself fortunate that we're not pressing criminal charges." The words hit like physical blows, but Maria absorbed them without reaction. She had expected this outcome from the moment Mrs. Henderson had made her announcement. The game had been rigged before it began, the conclusion inevitable once the powerful decided that her presence was inconvenient. As she moved toward the staff quarters to collect her few belongings, Maria heard a sound that stopped her like a physical wall, Harper's voice, calling her name from somewhere upstairs. "Maria! Maria!" The sound was raw with panic, a child's cry of abandonment that echoed through the mansion like a bird caught in a cage. She heard footsteps running, doors slamming, Dr. Whitfield's sharp commands for Harper to return to his room immediately. But Maria didn't turn back. She couldn't bear to see the confusion and betrayal in Harper's eyes, couldn't explain why the world had suddenly become cruel again, just when he had learned to trust it. Instead, she packed her small suitcase with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to leave quickly, taking only what belonged to her and nothing more. The medal of San Miguel that she had shared with Harper remained in his possession, her choice, her gift, her blessing on a boy who would need protection from a world that had proven once again how quickly love could be twisted into loss. The mansion fell back into silence, like a held breath finally released. But it was a different silence now. Not peaceful, but hollow. The kind that echoes in houses where trust has been murdered and no one wants to acknowledge the corpse. Harper's brief return to the world reversed itself within days. He stopped speaking again, stopped playing piano, stopped eating anything but the minimum necessary for survival. His regression was swift and complete, as if Maria's departure had pulled a cornerstone from the carefully rebuilt architecture of his healing. Dr. Whitfield attributed this setback to what she termed the inevitable collapse of pseudo-attachment and recommended increased therapy sessions at her usual rate of $300 per hour. But her professional satisfaction at eliminating her competition was tainted by Harper's obvious deterioration and Jonathan's growing skepticism about her methods. Jonathan threw himself back into work with the desperate intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. He spent 18-hour days in his downtown office, monitoring his investment portfolio with obsessive attention, as if the rising numbers in his accounts could somehow balance the emptiness that had returned to his home. His real estate holdings expanded, his cryptocurrency investments multiplied, his net worth crossed into half-billion territory. But the success felt hollow as fool's gold. The other staff members discovered that their victory in eliminating Maria brought them no satisfaction. Mrs. Henderson had regained her unchallenged authority below stairs, but ruling over a tomb provided little gratification. The mansion felt dead again, drained of the warmth and life that had made their work meaningful rather than merely mercenary. James found himself missing Maria's gentle presence, her habit of asking about his grandchildren, her tendency to hum while she worked. Even Delphine admitted privately that the kitchen felt colder without Maria's soft songs drifting from the adjacent rooms. Dr. Whitfield's triumph proved Pyrrhic as Harper's condition worsened beyond her ability to address. The boy who had been taking tentative steps toward recovery now refused to engage in any therapeutic activities. He spent hours sitting motionless in the music room, staring at the piano he no longer touched, clutching the silver medal Maria had given him like a talisman against despair. 3 weeks after Maria's departure, Jonathan made a discovery that shattered his remaining faith in the people he had trusted. While searching through Sarah's jewelry box for insurance documentation, he found the missing emerald necklace tucked beneath a stack of love letters he had written to his wife during their courtship. The necklace had apparently fallen from its usual place on the dresser and slipped between the jewelry box and the wall, where it had remained hidden until Jonathan happened to move the furniture. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Maria had been innocent. She had been falsely accused, publicly humiliated, and dismissed from her position based on evidence that didn't exist, and testimony from people whose motives he had never questioned. The magnitude of his injustice grew clearer as Jonathan reflected on the 8 months Maria had worked in his household. He remembered her patience with Harper's silence, her gentle persistence in coaxing the boy back toward life, the way his son's face had lit up in her presence. He recalled her respectful demeanor, her obvious intelligence despite her lack of formal education, her habit of working beyond her required hours because she cared about the family's well-being rather than merely completing assigned tasks. Jonathan realized that in his grief and desperation, he had allowed professional jealousy and class prejudice to poison his judgment. He had been so eager to believe the worst about someone who didn't fit his world's social expectations that he had ignored the evidence of his own eyes, that Maria had brought more healing to his household in 8 months than all the expensive professionals had managed in 2 years. Jonathan's search for Maria began with phone calls to the employment agency that had placed her, but they claimed to have no current contact information. The address she had provided led to a Bedford-Stuyvesant apartment building where the superintendent said she had moved out 2 weeks earlier without leaving a forwarding address. Her former employers in Brooklyn Heights remembered her fondly, but hadn't heard from her since she had taken the position with the Lewis family. It was as if she had simply vanished into the vast anonymity of New York City, one more invisible worker whose life intersected briefly with wealth before disappearing back into the shadows where the powerful rarely looked. But Jonathan Lewis hadn't built a $500 million empire by accepting defeat easily. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional who specialized in locating people who didn't want to be found. The search took 3 weeks and cost $15,000. Pocket change for a man whose monthly investment income exceeded most people's annual salaries. But every day felt like a lifetime to Harper, who had retreated so far into silence that even Dr. Whitfield was beginning to express concern about his psychological state. The investigator finally traced Maria to a small studio apartment in Washington Heights, a neighborhood where Spanish mixed with English on every street corner, and the aroma of rice and beans drifted from windows like prayers made edible. She was working 3 part-time jobs, cleaning offices in Midtown during the early morning hours, providing home care for an elderly woman in the afternoons, and stocking shelves at a grocery store during evening shifts. The combined income barely covered her rent and basic expenses, leaving nothing for luxuries or savings. But it was honest work that allowed her to sleep without shame. When Jonathan knocked on her door on a gray December afternoon, Maria answered wearing a paint-stained apron over worn jeans, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her studio apartment was tiny but spotlessly clean, decorated with family photographs and potted plants that brought life to the small space. The contrast between this modest home and the marble mansion on Fifth Avenue could not have been starker, yet Jonathan immediately felt more comfortable here than he had in his own house since Maria's departure. "Mr. Lewis," Maria said simply, no surprise in her voice, as if she had been expecting this visit. She stepped aside to let him enter, her manner neither welcoming nor hostile, simply resigned to whatever came next. The apartment was warm despite its size, heated by love and care rather than expensive systems. Jonathan found himself looking around with genuine curiosity, noting details that revealed Maria's character. Library books in both English and Spanish stacked neatly on a small table, a sewing kit where she apparently mended her own clothes, photographs of family members who lived too far away to visit but close enough to love. "I found the necklace," Jonathan said without preamble, his voice heavy with shame and regret. "It was never stolen. It had fallen behind Sarah's jewelry box. You were innocent." Maria nodded as if this revelation confirmed something she had always known. "Yes," she said quietly, "I was." The simple dignity of her response struck Jonathan more powerfully than any dramatic protest of innocence could have. She had never expected justice, had never demanded vindication, had simply absorbed the injustice and moved forward with her life because survival required her to keep working rather than fighting battles she knew she couldn't win. "I owe you an apology," Jonathan continued, though the words felt inadequate to cover the magnitude of his failure. "I owe you compensation for the injustice you suffered, and He paused, struggling with pride and desperation in equal measure. "I need to ask you to come back. He's lost without you. We're all lost without you." Maria studied his face for a long moment, seeing past the expensive clothes and corporate authority to the broken man beneath. "How is he?" she asked, and Jonathan heard genuine concern in her voice despite everything that had happened. "He's stopped speaking again, stopped playing piano, stopped being the boy you helped him become. Dr. Whitfield says it's a temporary setback, but I think we both know better. You were the one who reached him when no one else could, and losing you has broken something inside him that I don't know how to fix." Tears gathered in Maria's eyes, not for herself, but for a 9-year-old boy who had learned to trust again, only to have that trust shattered by adult cruelty and stupidity. She thought of Harper sitting alone in that cold mansion, clutching the medal she had given him, wondering why the woman who had sung him back to life had suddenly abandoned him without explanation. "It's not about the money," Maria said finally. "It was never about the money. It's about dignity, about being trusted, about working somewhere that values who you are rather than just what you do." Jonathan nodded, understanding for the first time the true cost of his mistake. "I can't undo what happened," he said, "but I can promise it won't happen again. The people who accused you are no longer with our household. Harper needs you, but more than that, he deserves to have you back in his life, if you're willing to forgive us for failing you so completely. The decision Maria faced was more complex than Jonathan realized. Returning to the Lewis mansion meant risking her heart again, trusting people who had already proven themselves capable of betrayal. But it also meant helping a child who had touched her soul, completing the healing they had begun together before fear and prejudice had torn it apart. The reunion began not with grand gestures, but with small ones, like most true healing does. Maria returned to the Fifth Avenue mansion on a cold January morning when snow dusted Central Park like powdered sugar, and the city sparkled with winter light. Harper was in the music room, sitting on the piano bench with his back to the door, his small shoulders hunched with a sadness too large for his 9-year-old frame. He held the silver medal Maria had given him, turning it over in his palm with the mechanical repetition of prayer or madness. Maria approached slowly, her footsteps soft on the Persian carpet, and began to hum the same Mexican lullaby that had first bridged the silence between them months ago. Harper's shoulders stiffened, and for a moment Maria wondered if too much damage had been done, if trust once broken could ever be fully repaired. Then the boy's head turned slightly, just enough to confirm that the voice was real and not another auditory ghost conjured by longing. Duérmete, mi niño, Maria sang softly, the Spanish words carrying all the tenderness that English sometimes couldn't hold. Que la noche ya llegó. Harper slowly swiveled on the piano bench until he faced her fully, his eyes wide with disbelief and desperate hope. The metal slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor with a tiny metallic sound that seemed to echo through the room like a bell announcing resurrection. For several heartbeats they looked at each other across the space that had held so much pain and absence, two souls recognizing each other after a long separation. Then, Harper slipped from the piano bench and walked toward Maria with careful steps, as if she might disappear if he moved too quickly. When he reached her, he pressed against her side in a hug that communicated everything words could not: forgiveness, relief, love, and the particular desperation of a child who had learned that safety could be snatched away without warning. Maria wrapped her arms around him, feeling his thin frame shake with silent sobs, and continued singing until his breathing steadied and his grip relaxed from desperate to simply glad. "I thought you were gone forever," Harper whispered against her shoulder, his voice rusty from disuse but clear as mountain water. "I thought I had done something wrong, and that's why you left without saying goodbye." Maria knelt so they were at eye level, her hands gentle on his shoulders. "Oh, mijo, you did nothing wrong, nothing at all. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, terrible mistakes that hurt people who don't deserve it. But I'm here now, and if you'll have me, I'd like to stay." Harper nodded vigorously, tears streaming down his cheeks, but his expression brightening like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Will you teach me the rest of that song? Mama used to sing to me in French sometimes, but I want to learn your language too." The request was so simple yet profound that Maria felt her own tears begin to fall. "Of course, mi amor. We'll sing together, and we'll play piano together, and we'll make this house remember how to be happy again." Over the following weeks, the mansion underwent a transformation that went deeper than mere redecoration. Life returned to rooms that had been museums of grief. Warmth crept back into conversations, and laughter, genuine, spontaneous laughter, echoed through hallways that had almost forgotten what joy sounded like. Harper's recovery was remarkable, but not instant. He needed time to rebuild trust, to believe that this return to happiness wouldn't be snatched away again without warning. Maria understood this completely and never pushed, never rushed, simply remained present and consistent while the boy healed at his own pace. Jonathan watched this resurrection with wonder and gratitude that ran deeper than his vast wealth. His investment portfolio continued to grow, his Bitcoin holdings alone now worth over $60 million, But he found himself caring less about the numbers and more about the sound of his son's voice, calling out homework questions from the kitchen table where Maria helped him with multiplication and reading comprehension. The new staff Jonathan hired were chosen not just for their qualifications, but for their kindness, their ability to work as part of a team rather than competing for dominance. The mansion became what it had never been before, not just a display of wealth, but a genuine home where people lived and loved and grew together. 2 years after Maria's return, the Lewis mansion had become something Jonathan had never imagined possible, a place where wealth and warmth coexisted, where his son's laughter was more valuable than any investment return, and where a woman from Brooklyn had taught them all the difference between a house and a home. Harper, now 11, spoke fluently in both English and Spanish, played piano with the passion his mother had dreamed of, and carried himself with a confidence that came from knowing he was unconditionally loved. His academic progress amazed his teachers, not because Maria was more qualified than his expensive tutors, but because she approached his learning with patience and genuine interest rather than clinical detachment. She helped him with homework at the kitchen table, celebrated small victories, and never made him feel stupid for asking questions. More importantly, she had taught him that making mistakes was part of learning, not evidence of failure. The transformation extended beyond Harper to touch every corner of their lives. Jonathan found himself leaving work earlier, choosing family dinners over late meetings, discovering that his son's stories about school friends and playground adventures were more engaging than quarterly profit reports. His relationship with Harper had evolved from distant concern to genuine companionship, built on shared experiences rather than financial obligation. Maria had become far more than an employee. She was family in every way that mattered. Jonathan had long since stopped thinking of her as the help and began introducing her to business colleagues and neighbors as Harper's former nanny and current companion, though even those titles felt inadequate to describe her role in their lives. She was the one who remembered that Harper needed new sneakers, who knew exactly how he liked his sandwiches cut, who could tell from the sound of his footsteps whether he'd had a good day at school or needed extra attention. She was the keeper of their daily rhythms, the creator of the small traditions that made their house feel like home. The financial arrangements had evolved naturally over time. Jonathan had increased Maria's salary substantially, not because she asked, but because he recognized her true value to their family. He had also set up a college fund for any children she might have in the future, established a retirement account in her name, and made sure she had comprehensive health insurance that covered not just emergencies, but preventive care and mental health services. These benefits weren't grudging concessions, but expressions of gratitude for someone who had saved his family when they didn't even know they needed saving. One spring evening, as they sat in the garden that Maria had coaxed back to life with the same patience she had shown Harper, Jonathan finally found words for what had been growing in his heart for months. "Maria," he said, watching her help Harper identify different types of flowers in the botanical guide they kept on the outdoor table. "I want you to know that you'll always have a place with us for as long as you want it, not as an employee, but as family. This is your home, too." She looked up from the guidebook, her face glowing in the soft light of the solar lanterns they had installed along the garden paths. "I know," she said simply. "I've known for a while now. This is where I belong, where my heart lives. Harper's like the son I never had, and you—" She paused, considering how to express something that didn't quite fit into traditional categories. "You're the family I chose, and who chose me back." The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and the sound of Harper's delighted laughter as he discovered a monarch butterfly resting on the roses Maria had planted beneath his bedroom window. In that moment, all of them felt the completeness of a circle that had been broken and carefully repaired, stronger now in the places where it had cracked. Jonathan's wealth had grown to nearly $700 million by then, his investment portfolio a masterpiece of diversification and timing that business magazines wanted to profile. But sitting in his garden with Maria and Harper, Listening to their easy conversation about butterflies and weekend plans, he understood that his true fortune couldn't be measured in dollars or cryptocurrencies or real estate holdings. His true wealth was the sound of his son's uninhibited laughter, the sight of Maria's face lighting up when Harper mastered a new piano piece, and the knowledge that they had all saved each other from different kinds of emptiness. But life, as Maria's grandmother used to say, has a way of testing the strength of bonds when you least expect it. The challenge came not from within their carefully reconstructed family, but from outside forces that threatened to tear apart everything they had built together. It was a warm Tuesday in late June when the call came that would shake their world once again. Harper was in the garden with Maria, both of them kneeling in the dirt as she taught him to plant tomato seedlings she had started from seeds, saved from last season's harvest. The boy's hands, once so pale and thin from grief and neglect, were now brown with earth and strong from piano practice and garden work. He chattered away in the mixture of English and Spanish that had become their private language, asking questions about root systems and wondering aloud whether the baby plants could feel scared when they were transplanted. "Plantas son como niños," Maria explained, brushing soil from Harper's cheek with a tenderness that had become as natural as breathing. They need time to feel safe in their new home, but with love and patience, they grow strong. Jonathan watched from his study window, marveling as he often did at the transformation in both his son and himself. The boy who had once been a ghost haunting the mansion's halls was now fully alive, curious about everything, confident enough to ask questions and make mistakes, and try again. The millionaire who had once measured his worth only in portfolio performance now found his greatest satisfaction in moments like these, ordinary afternoon scenes of a woman teaching a child about life through the metaphor of growing things. The phone rang with the sharp insistence that only bad news seems to carry. Jonathan's assistant, Patricia, had instructions never to disturb him during Harper's after-school hours, unless it was truly urgent. The fact that she was calling meant something serious had happened. "Mr. Lewis," Patricia's voice was tight with barely controlled panic, "there's been an incident at the Hartford building. The fire department and police are on site, and they're asking for you specifically." The Hartford building was one of Jonathan's most valuable real estate holdings, a luxury apartment complex in Tribeca that housed 50 families and generated nearly $2 million annually in rental income. But more importantly, it was where Maria's cousin Elena lived with her 3 young children in a modest one-bedroom apartment that Maria helped subsidize because Elena's husband had been deported the previous year, leaving her alone to support their family on a house cleaner's wages. "What kind of incident?" Jonathan asked, though his stomach was already clenching with dread. "There was an explosion in the basement, some kind of gas leak. The building is being evacuated, but—" Patricia paused, and in that silence, Jonathan heard the weight of something terrible. "Several people were injured in the initial blast. They're asking for building owner contact information for insurance purposes, and there are reporters," and Jonathan was already moving toward the door, grabbing his keys and wallet. "Call the car service. I need to get there immediately." As he rushed past the garden, Maria looked up from the tomato seedlings, her intuition immediately sensing something wrong. "¿Qué pasa?" she asked, rising to her feet with the quick grace of someone who had learned to read danger in the subtle shifts of atmosphere around her. "There's been an accident at one of my buildings," Jonathan said, his voice carefully controlled but unable to hide the urgency completely. "The Hartford complex in Tribeca, they're evacuating everyone." The blood drained from Maria's face. "Elena," she whispered, the name carrying all her fear. "Elena and the children live there." Without another word, she was moving toward the house, pulling off her gardening gloves as she walked. Harper, sensing the sudden tension, followed close behind, his young face creased with worry he didn't fully understand but felt completely. "I'm coming with you," Maria announced, not asking permission but stating a fact as immutable as gravity. "If Elena and the children are hurt, if they need help—" Jonathan nodded, understanding that trying to leave Maria behind would be both impossible and wrong. "Harper, you should stay here with—" "No." the boy interrupted with unusual firmness. "We're a family. Families stick together when there's trouble." Looking at his son's determined face, Jonathan felt a surge of pride mixed with protectiveness. Harper was right. They were a family now, bound together by more than blood or legal documents, and families faced crises together, even when those crises might break their hearts. The ride to Tribeca passed in tense silence, broken only by Maria's whispered prayers in Spanish and Harper's quiet questions about building safety and whether everyone would be okay. Jonathan found himself praying, too, to a God he hadn't spoken to since Sarah's funeral, asking not for protection of his real estate investment, but for the safety of people whose names he didn't know, but whom Maria loved, and therefore mattered to him, too. The scene that greeted them at the Hartford building was chaos orchestrated by emergency responders who had clearly dealt with this kind of disaster before. Fire trucks lined the street, their red lights painting everything in an apocalyptic glow. Police barriers kept crowds of onlookers at a safe distance, while paramedics moved efficiently between ambulances and a triage station set up on the sidewalk. The building itself looked wounded, but not destroyed. Windows blown out on the first 3 floors, scorch marks climbing the brick facade like black tears, but the structure still standing, still salvageable. Maria was out of the car before it had completely stopped, her eyes scanning the crowd of displaced residents sitting on the sidewalk across the street, wrapped in Red Cross blankets and wearing expressions of shock mixed with gratitude to be alive. "Elena!" she called out, her voice cutting through the din of sirens and radio chatter. "Elena! ¿Dónde estás?" A woman emerged from the crowd, leading 3 small children by the hand. Elena Morales was 28 years old, but looked older. Worn down by the kind of exhaustion that comes from working 2 jobs while raising children alone in a city that seemed designed to crush people like her. Her hair was singed on one side, and she had a makeshift bandage on her right arm, but she was walking and her children were clinging to her skirts like baby birds, so Jonathan knew they had been among the lucky ones. "Maria!" Elena cried out, and the cousins fell into each other's arms with the fierce embrace of women who had learned to be each other's safety net in a world that offered no guarantees. The children, Isabella, age 6, Carlos, 4, and baby Sophia, barely 2, pressed against Maria's legs, seeking comfort from the woman they called Tia, even though she was only their second cousin. Harper, without being asked, knelt down to Carlos's level and began entertaining the frightened boy with a card trick Maria had taught him, using the kind of gentle patience he had learned from watching her care for others. "Están todos bien?" Maria asked, her hands moving over Elena's face and arms, checking for injuries her cousin might be hiding. "We're okay. We're alive," Elena replied in heavily accented English, including Jonathan and Harper in her response. The explosion. It happened so fast. One minute Isabella was doing homework, the next minute the floor was shaking and the windows were breaking. We barely got out. Jonathan found himself stepping forward, driven by an impulse he couldn't have explained. These people were strangers to him in every practical sense, but they were Maria's family, which meant they were part of his family now, too. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked Elena. "Family? Friends?" Elena's expression tightened with the particular shame of people who are used to surviving on their own, but find themselves suddenly dependent on others' charity. "My sister in the Bronx, maybe. But her place is so small, and with the children," she gestured helplessly, unwilling to burden anyone, but also realistic about their options. "The Red Cross. They say they have shelters, but—" The unspoken end of that sentence hung in the air between them. Elena had heard the stories, knew what sometimes happened to vulnerable families in overcrowded emergency shelters. She would sleep on the street before she risked her children's safety. Maria was already reaching into her purse, probably to offer what little cash she carried, when Jonathan made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "You'll stay with us," he said simply. "All of you. For as long as you need." The offer was so unexpected that even Maria stared at him in shock. Jonathan Lewis, the man who had once fired her based on false accusations, was now inviting her unemployed, undocumented cousin and 3 small children into his Fifth Avenue mansion without hesitation or conditions. "Mr. Lewis," Elena began, her voice heavy with the dignity of someone who had never asked for charity and didn't want to start now. "That's very kind, but we couldn't impose on your family like that." "You're not imposing," Jonathan replied, looking around at the displaced residents, the emergency workers, the controlled chaos of people whose lives had been upended in a matter of minutes. "Maria's family is our family. Harper, tell them." His son, still crouched beside 4-year-old Carlos, looked up with complete seriousness. "We have lots of rooms that nobody uses," he said matter-of-factly, "and Maria makes the best pancakes for breakfast. You could help her in the garden, and I could teach Carlos to play piano." The simple invitation from a child cut through all the adult complications of pride and propriety. Elena looked at her children, tired, scared, made homeless in an instant, and then at Maria's face, which glowed with love and hope and the particular relief that comes when family takes care of family. "Por esta noche," she said finally, "just for tonight, until we can make other arrangements." But Maria and Jonathan exchanged glances that said they both understood that "just for tonight" had a way of becoming "as long as you need" when children were involved and hearts were already connected. As they walked toward the car, Harper helping Carlos navigate around the fire hoses while Isabella clutched her baby sister, Jonathan realized that his definition of family had expanded again in the space of a single emergency. He had started with just himself and Harper, added Maria, and now included Elena and her children, not because of legal obligations or financial arrangements, but because love had its own mathematics, its own way of multiplying and dividing that had nothing to do with blood relations or social expectations. The integration of Elena's family into the Lewis household happened with surprising naturalness, like a river accepting a tributary and becoming stronger for the addition. What Jonathan had expected to be a temporary arrangement, lasting a few days, stretched into weeks, then months, as it became clear that the Hartford building would need extensive renovations before residents could return, and Elena's one-bedroom apartment had been completely destroyed in the explosion, taking with it the few possessions she had managed to accumulate in 3 years of American dreaming. But instead of feeling burdened by the expanded household, Jonathan found himself energized by the chaos and laughter that 3 young children brought to rooms that had been quiet for too long. Isabella, the 6-year-old, was serious and studious like Harper had been at that age, but without the weight of grief that had made Harper's early years so somber. She appointed herself Harper's Spanish tutor, patiently correcting his pronunciation while he helped her with English grammar homework. Carlos, the 4-year-old, was pure light and motion, climbing furniture and asking endless questions with the fearless curiosity of someone who had never learned that the world could be dangerous. And baby Sophia, not quite 2, toddled through the mansion's marble halls as if she owned them, babbling in the fluid mixture of Spanish and English that had become the household's unofficial language. Maria thrived in her new role as the bridge between 2 families learning to become one. She translated not just languages, but customs, explaining to Elena why Harper needed quiet time to practice piano, helping Isabella understand that it was okay to use the good dishes, because Mr. Jonathan wanted the children to feel special, mediating the small cultural collisions that occurred when different ways of living intersected. Elena proved to be a revelation, faced with the opportunity to live without the crushing pressure of rent and childcare costs. She blossomed into someone Jonathan hadn't expected. Whip-smart, funny, deeply knowledgeable about everything from car repair to herbal medicine. She had dropped out of high school in Guatemala to help support her family, but her intelligence was the kind that couldn't be contained by formal education. She could fix the mansion's temperamental washing machine with a paperclip and intuition, taught Harper to braid friendship bracelets that he wore proudly to school, and turned the small balcony off the kitchen into a thriving herb garden that supplied fresh cilantro and oregano for her incredible cooking. Within a month, Elena had quietly assumed responsibility for many of the household's practical needs that had previously required expensive service calls. She could unclog drains, repair small appliances, even troubleshoot the smart home technology that had baffled the previous staff. But more than her practical skills, Elena brought a perspective that gradually opened Jonathan's eyes to realities he had never considered, despite living in New York City his entire life. Through her stories, shared during evening meals that had evolved into long conversations around the kitchen table, he learned about the parallel economy of undocumented workers who kept the city running through sheer determination and mutual aid. He heard about families who lived in overcrowded apartments, working multiple jobs with no benefits or protection, sending money back to relatives while saving every penny toward some distant dream of stability. Elena spoke of friends who had master's degrees from universities in their home countries, but cleaned offices for minimum wage because their credentials weren't recognized here, of brilliant children who couldn't apply for college scholarships because of their immigration status, of people who lived in constant fear that a single encounter with police could end in deportation and permanent separation from everything they had built. These weren't abstract policy issues anymore. They were human realities that had names and faces, and sat at his dinner table asking Harper to pass the rice. Jonathan began to understand that his wealth existed in a bubble that had insulated him not just from financial worry, but from the experiences of the vast majority of people who shared his city. Maria had begun that education, but Elena completed it, helping him see how privilege worked not just through what it provided, but through what it allowed him to remain ignorant about. The children adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that kids possess when adults around them project confidence and love rather than anxiety and resentment. Isabella made friends at the prestigious private school Jonathan enrolled her in, quickly emerging as one of the top students in her grade, despite having started the year behind in formal English skills. Carlos thrived in the Montessori preschool that Harper had attended, his natural exuberance channeled into creative projects that he proudly displayed on the refrigerator alongside Harper's honor roll certificates and piano recital programs. Baby Sophia simply grew, as toddlers do, but in an environment rich with attention and stimulation, and multiple adults who delighted in her every new word and accomplishment. Harper, meanwhile, had become a different child entirely from the silent ghost who had once haunted the mansion's halls. At 11, he was confident and outgoing, equally comfortable switching between English and Spanish, at home in both the world of private schools and trust funds and the world of Elena's friends who came over for Sunday dinners that stretched into the evening with music and stories and children falling asleep in their mother's arms. He was learning that family could be constructed rather than just inherited, that home was something you built with daily choices rather than something automatically conferred by genetics or money. The boy who had once been afraid to speak now served as an interpreter and cultural ambassador, helping his school friends understand why Isabella sometimes brought homemade tamales for lunch instead of store-bought snacks, teaching Carlos English words through games that Maria had taught him, reading bedtime stories to Sophia in both languages. Jonathan, watching Harper navigate between different worlds with such ease and confidence, realized that his son was learning lessons about empathy and adaptability that no expensive private school could teach. One evening in November, as the first snow of the season dusted Central Park and the mansion glowed with warmth and the sounds of children's laughter, Jonathan found himself in his study looking not at stock reports or investment summaries, but at college brochures Elena had been secretly collecting. She had asked Maria to help her understand the application process, dreaming of someday finishing her education and maybe becoming a nurse, but believing it was impossible because of her immigration status and the cost of tuition. Jonathan fingered the glossy pamphlets, thinking about the trust fund he had established for Harper's education, millions of dollars sitting in accounts waiting for one boy to need them. He thought about Isabella's quick mind and eager questions, about Carlos's natural mechanical aptitude, about Sophia's bright curiosity. He thought about Elena's determination and Maria's quiet wisdom, and how both women had transformed his understanding of what it meant to be successful, what it meant to be wealthy, what it meant to be family. That night, he made several phone calls that would have surprised his old self. He reached out to his attorney to explore legal pathways for Elena's immigration status. He contacted the financial advisor who managed Harper's trust fund to discuss expanding its scope. He called the headmaster at Harper's school to inquire about their scholarship programs and diversity initiatives, and he scheduled a meeting with his accountant to discuss establishing a new kind of charitable foundation, one that wouldn't just write checks to established nonprofits, but would directly support individuals and families who were working toward education and stability. He was still operating from a position of immense privilege, still using wealth to solve problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. But his motivations had shifted away from maintaining his own comfort and toward expanding opportunities for people he had learned to love, people who had taught him that generosity wasn't just about giving money, but about sharing life, about making space at the table for voices that had been excluded, about recognizing that intelligence and worthiness existed in places his old worldview had never thought to look. As he went to bed that night, Jonathan could hear Elena singing softly to Sophia in Spanish, the melody drifting through the halls of the mansion that had once been silent as a tomb. Maria was reading a bedtime story to Carlos, her voice gentle and patient as she helped him sound out unfamiliar words. Down the hall, Harper was video chatting with Isabella, helping her with a math problem even though she was supposed to be sleeping. The sounds of family-filled spaces that money alone had never been able to warm. His net worth had climbed past $800 million that quarter, his cryptocurrency investments performing beyond his wildest expectations. But lying in the dark, listening to the sounds of people who loved each other, Jonathan understood that he had finally learned to measure wealth correctly. By spring, the Lewis household had found its rhythm as an extended family of choice, bound together by something stronger than legal documents or biological connections. The mansion had been transformed from a monument to loneliness into a living example of what America could be at its best. A place where people from different backgrounds and circumstances came together to create something better than what any of them could have built alone. Harper had grown into a young man who moved easily between worlds, equally at home at elite private school events and at Elena's friends' quinceañeras, fluent in the languages of both privilege and struggle. Isabella was thriving academically, her natural intelligence flourishing under the encouragement of teachers who recognized her potential and provided extra support to help her succeed. Carlos had discovered a passion for building things, constructing elaborate structures out of blocks and recycled materials that demonstrated an intuitive understanding of engineering principles that amazed his preschool teachers. Little Sophia was talking in full sentences now, switching between English and Spanish as efficiently as Harper did, and had developed the particular confidence that comes from being the cherished baby of a large, loving household. Elena had enrolled in community college, studying nursing and evening classes while managing the household during the day, an arrangement that worked because Jonathan had quietly arranged for a substantial scholarship that covered not just tuition, but childcare and transportation costs. She was discovering that her dream of helping people heal wasn't impossible after all, just delayed by circumstances that were changing through persistence and the support of people who believed in her potential. Maria had evolved from an employee into the emotional center of a complex family system, the person everyone turned to for comfort, advice, and the particular wisdom that comes from having survived hardship without becoming bitter. She mediated disagreements, celebrated achievements, and maintained the delicate balance that allowed 7 very different people to live together in harmony. Her role in the household was impossible to define in traditional terms: part mother figure, part counselor, part cultural interpreter, part guardian angel. Jonathan's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. The man who had once measured his worth entirely through financial metrics now evaluated his days based on different criteria. Harper's laughter, Isabella's report cards, Carlos's excited descriptions of his latest building projects, Sophia's arms reaching for him when he came home from work, Elena's growing confidence as she pursued her education, Maria's quiet satisfaction as she watched the family she had helped create flourish around her. His business continued to prosper, but he had learned to structure his professional life around his personal priorities rather than the other way around. He left the office early for school plays and piano recitals, took conference calls from the sidelines of soccer games, and made it clear to his staff that unless the markets were literally collapsing, he was not to be disturbed during family dinner time. The changes in the Lewis household had not gone unnoticed in their social circle. Some of Jonathan's wealthy friends struggled to understand his new living arrangements, making comments about charity cases and taking advantage that revealed more about their own limitations than about the family dynamics they claimed to be concerned about. But others had begun to ask serious questions about their own philanthropic activities, wondering if they too had been treating generosity as a tax write-off rather than a genuine engagement with the community around them. The children had become ambassadors for a different way of thinking about family and success. Harper's classmates at his elite private school had initially been curious about his house guests, but gradually came to see Isabella's presence as normal and even enviable. She was funny and smart and good at soccer, and having her around made Harper more interesting, more worldly, less privileged in the narrow sense that could sometimes make wealthy kids appear tragic despite their advantages. Isabella, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity at her school for bringing the best homemade lunches, courtesy of Elena's incredible cooking, and for being able to translate between Spanish and English with the kind of fluency that impressed both teachers and classmates. She had also emerged as a fierce advocate for other immigrant children in her class, using the confidence that came from feeling secure in her own situation to help others navigate the particular challenges of being new to American schools and customs. The household operated on principles that had evolved organically rather than being imposed from above. Chores were shared based on ability and availability rather than age or status. Harper helped with laundry and dishwashing. Isabella set tables and organized toys. Carlos fed pets and watered plants. Elena maintained appliances and managed schedules. Maria cooked and provided emotional support. Jonathan handled finances and legal issues. Even Sophia had her role, providing entertainment and affection that kept everyone's spirits up during stressful times. Family meetings happened around the kitchen table every Sunday evening, where everyone from 11-year-old Harper to 2-year-old Sophia had a voice in making decisions about household rules, vacation plans, and any problems that needed collective attention. These meetings were conducted in both English and Spanish, with patient translation for anyone who needed clarification, and had become a model of democratic decision-making that impressed the few outsiders who were invited to observe. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their life together was how normal it had become. Visitors who came expecting to find either a fairy tale or a sociological experiment instead discovered a regular family dealing with regular problems, homework struggles and bedtime battles, disagreements about chores and screen time, the logistics of getting multiple children to different activities on time. The wealth that had once isolated the Lewis family from authentic human connection now served as a foundation for something far more valuable. A demonstration that love multiplied rather than divided when it was shared generously, that families could be constructed through choice and commitment rather than just biology, that America's promise of opportunity for all could be more than just words on a monument when people decided to make it real in their own lives. One evening in June, as they sat in the garden watching fireflies begin to blink among the roses Elena had taught Harper to prune, Jonathan found himself thinking about the interview he had given that week to a journalist, writing about innovative philanthropy. The reporter had been particularly interested in what she called his unconventional approach to family wealth, trying to understand how a Wall Street millionaire had ended up sharing his home with undocumented immigrants and treating his former housekeeper as an equal partner in child-rearing decisions. "It's not unconventional," he had told her finally. "It's just human." The unconventional thing was living in isolation, measuring success only by portfolio performance, treating people like interchangeable service providers rather than individual human beings with their own dreams and struggles and wisdom to share. This, he had gestured around the mansion where they conducted the interview, where children's artwork hung on walls next to original paintings worth more than most people's houses, where Spanish and English mixed in conversations about homework and career planning and weekend adventures. This is what family is supposed to look like when you let love make the decisions instead of fear. Now, watching Maria help Sophia chase fireflies while Harper and Isabella practiced a piano duet and Elena quizzed Carlos on his colors in both languages, Jonathan felt the deep satisfaction that comes not from accumulating wealth, but from building something meaningful with the resources at your disposal. His net worth had crossed the billion-dollar threshold that quarter, making him one of the richest men in New York City. But his true fortune was measured in laughter and languages, in the confidence of children who felt loved and supported, in the dreams being pursued by women who had been given the space and resources to discover their own potential. The fireflies blinked like tiny stars fallen to earth, and Harper's piano music drifted through the open windows, and Maria's lullaby voice joined the evening symphony. And Jonathan Lewis understood that he had finally learned the difference between being wealthy and being rich. And you? Have you ever worked for someone who learned from you without saying it out loud? Have you ever been the invisible strength holding a family together, the one who noticed what no one else saw, who cared when no one else bothered? Maybe you're listening to this while folding someone else's laundry, or cleaning someone else's kitchen, or taking care of someone else's children or elderly parents. Maybe you've been overlooked, underestimated, or unfairly blamed for things you didn't do. Maybe you felt like Maria, carrying the weight of other people's lives while your own struggles remained invisible. I want you to know that your work matters, that the love you pour into your daily tasks doesn't go unnoticed by the universe, even when it goes unacknowledged by the people you serve. You are the healers, the peacemakers, the ones who hold families together with quiet strength and endless patience. Your hands may be rough from work, your back may ache from long hours, your heart may sometimes feel heavy from being taken for granted. But you are warriors of compassion, knights in aprons and work clothes, angels disguised as ordinary women doing extraordinary things. Maria's story is your story too. The dignity you carry, the grace you show in the face of unfairness, the way you keep loving even when love isn't returned. These are superpowers that the wealthy can't buy and the powerful can't understand. You heal the world one small act of kindness at a time. One well-made meal, one cleaned room, one soothed child, one comforted elder. Your value doesn't depend on others recognizing it. Like Maria, you are precious exactly as you are, worthy of respect and love and all the good things life has to offer. The families you serve may not always see your worth, but somewhere in their hearts, they know their lives are better because you're in them. The children grow up remembering your songs, your stories, your patient hands teaching them to tie their shoes or helping them with homework. The parents may not say thank you enough, but they sleep better, knowing you're taking care of what matters most. You are the backbone of families, the foundation of homes, the invisible thread that holds everything together. Your story matters too. Maybe you've been the Maria in someone else's life, bringing healing through your presence, your patience, your refusal to give up on people when they had given up on themselves. Maybe you've been the Harper, silent and withdrawn, until someone saw past your protective walls and sang you back to life. Maybe you've been the Jonathan, so focused on external measures of success that you almost missed the real treasures right in front of you. Or perhaps you've been the Elena, working multiple jobs and sacrificing your own dreams to provide for people you love, wondering if anyone sees how hard you're trying, if your efforts have any meaning beyond mere survival. Each role in this story reflects a different aspect of the human experience, a different way that we connect and heal and grow together. The woman who works in someone else's kitchen while dreaming of her own restaurant, who speaks multiple languages fluently but is treated as if she's unintelligent because of her accent, who raises other people's children with the same care she gives her own. She is Maria. The child who has experienced loss so profound it steals his voice, who needs extraordinary patience and unconditional love to find his way back to trust and joy. He is Harper. The person who has been so successful in the world's terms that he has forgotten what really matters, who needs to be taught by those he considered beneath him that true wealth is measured in relationships and kindness. He is Jonathan. And the woman who works 3 jobs to keep her family together, who has talents and intelligence that the world refuses to acknowledge, who makes impossible sacrifices look effortless because she has no choice but to be strong. She is Elena. She is every woman who has crossed borders, taken risks, left everything familiar behind in pursuit of something better for her children. She is every mother who lies awake at night, calculating how to stretch $20 across a week's worth of meals. Every daughter who translates for her parents at parent-teacher conferences and medical appointments. Every sister who sends money home while working for wages that barely cover her own expenses. These stories intersect in real life every day. In households across America, where people from different backgrounds and circumstances learn to become family, not because they share blood, but because they share commitment, care, and the recognition that we all need each other to survive and thrive. In houses where children speak multiple languages and adults learn from each other across lines of class and culture and legal status, where wealth is shared not just as charity, but as a recognition of common humanity and interconnected fate. Maybe you're listening to this in a mansion where you tend to someone else's family, wondering if your own dreams will ever have space to grow. Maybe you're in a small apartment where you're raising children alone, doing your best with limited resources and unlimited love. Maybe you're in a corporate office staring at investment portfolios and wondering when accumulation became more important than connection. Maybe you're somewhere in between, navigating the spaces where different worlds meet, trying to build bridges between people who have been taught to see each other as strangers or threats instead of potential family. Wherever you are, whatever your circumstances, remember that every interaction is an opportunity to choose love over fear, inclusion over isolation, generosity over hoarding. Every person you encounter carries their own story of loss and hope, their own capacity for growth and healing, their own gifts that might not be immediately visible but are absolutely real and valuable. The housekeeper might be the wisest person in the room. The child might be the teacher. The employer might need to learn more than he needs to direct. The person with the least formal education might have the most important lessons to share. Maria's story is a reminder that healing happens not through expensive interventions or professional programs, but through the simple act of seeing and honoring each other's full humanity. Through singing while we work, through sharing our own pain to help others feel less alone, through patience with people who are struggling to find their voices, through the recognition that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, but multiplies into something that can transform entire families, entire communities, entire ways of understanding what it means to be successful and wealthy and blessed. The medal that Maria gave to Harper, San Miguel Arcangel, the patron saint of protection, represents something deeper than religious symbolism. It represents the way that small gestures, simple objects, brief moments of genuine connection can become talismans against despair and loneliness. We all have medals to give and receive, pieces of ourselves that we can share to help others feel protected and loved. Sometimes it's a song, sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's just the willingness to sit with someone in their pain without trying to fix it or explain it away. Your presence matters. Your work has meaning. Your love creates ripples that spread far beyond what you can see or measure. The children you care for will carry your songs into their own families. The elderly people you tend will remember your kindness in their final moments. The houses you clean become homes because you bring care and attention to the work. The families you serve become better versions of themselves because you model grace and dignity and the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. You are not invisible, even when you feel unseen. You are not worthless, even when you're underpaid. You are not powerless, even when you're treated as if your opinions don't matter. You are the foundation upon which other people's lives rest securely. You are the hands that prepare the meals and wash the clothes and tend the wounds, both physical and emotional. You are the voice that soothes fears and celebrates small victories and reminds people that they are loved. Tell me your story in the comments below. Share a moment when you made a difference in someone's life, or when someone made a difference in yours. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in Maria's quiet strength and unshakable dignity, leave a like and subscribe so this message can reach another woman who needs to hear that she matters, that her work has meaning, that her love is not wasted. Your story deserves to be heard. Your struggles deserve to be acknowledged. Your dreams deserve to have space to grow. Your love deserves to be returned. Your life has value that can't be measured in paychecks or immigration status or educational credentials or postal codes. You are enough, exactly as you are, and the world is better because you're in it. Click the link for more stories that celebrate the heroes hiding in plain sight, the women who keep the world running with their silent strength and endless hearts. Stories about people who find family in unexpected places, who learn that home is something you build rather than something you buy, who discover that the most profound wealth comes not from what you own, but from what you share. Thank you for walking this emotional journey with us, for carrying these stories into your own life and sharing them with others who need hope. We see you, we honor you, and we'll be here with another story of love, conquering injustice, of dignity triumphing over disrespect, of hearts finding their way home. Until next time, remember that you are enough, exactly as you are, and the love you give comes back to you in ways you might not expect but always deserve. Take care of yourself with the same tenderness you show others. You are worth it. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. And the family you're building, whether it's made of blood relations or chosen connections, whether it fits conventional definitions or creates new ones entirely, is valid and beautiful and exactly what the world needs more of. Keep singing your songs, even when no one seems to be listening. Keep offering your gifts, even when they're not immediately appreciated. Keep believing in the possibility of transformation, in your own power to heal and be healed, in the magic that happens when people decide to love each other across all the artificial barriers that society tries to build between us. You are Maria. You are Harper. You are Jonathan. You are Elena. You are every person who has ever needed healing, and every person who has ever offered it. You are the story that continues to unfold, the love that keeps multiplying. The proof that families are made not just of genetics but of choice, commitment, patience, and the daily decision to show up for each other with whatever gifts we have to offer. This is your story too. Thank you for being part of it.